Our guest today is Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, the Lou Gehrig of government, who until COVID had not missed a single vote in 27 years. And during that time, Grassley became one of the nation's watchdogs for taxpayers, business, agriculture, and the spirit of bipartisanship. He still lives and works on the same farm on which he was born, where his roots in Iowa and in the nation's future run deep. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. Like, kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
Well, Senator, thank you very much for joining us today. I've got to begin with, obviously, what happened with the second attempted assassination of Donald Trump. You know, you've looked into the situation where the Iranians had threatened the lives of Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Nikki Haley. How serious is it right now in terms of trying to protect our public leaders?
Well, it must be a fact that the Secret Service has not given proper attention to Trump as a candidate, the same way that they're giving attention to the vice president as a candidate. And I think it tells you the strength of the Trump campaign when he's had two attempts at assassination. Now, whether those are individual attempts or whether there's other parties involved, I don't know. We'll never know, I suppose, from the first one because that person is deceased.
Right.
But from this one, if this person talks, and I hope he does, and I hope it's an individual attempt, not just some group or outside force that's hired him to do it, but we're surely glad that there were no shots fired at the president, as we saw in Butler, Pennsylvania. We're glad that he's well. We're glad that we have the arrest. We're glad for the citizen that took picture of the license plate so he could be caught.
You are a champion of all sorts of things in all the years you've been in Congress and in the Senate. One thing is very clear. You have one of the best records of bipartisanship, how you vote. You kind of look at the issue square in the eye and determine which way to go, driven more by the interest of America and of people than necessarily a party all the time. How important is bipartisanship now as we go into another somewhat raucous presidential campaign cycle where polarization seems to be at a height?
Partisanship is greater now than it's ever been in the 44 years I've been in the Senate. But I think people get the view that it's really bad, and so bad that Democrats don't talk to Republicans and vice versa. But I like to explain to my constituents, to get to a finality on an issue, you have to have bipartisanship. When the Senate's 51 Democrat, 49 Republican, nothing would get done if you didn't have bipartisanship. Right. So it usually starts with the introduction of legislation. Grassley has an idea. I ought to find a Democrat that I can work with that has similar ideas. We probably have to work some things out before the bill's introduced. But once you get, let's say, a Grassley White House bill, because I have worked with Senator Whitehouse on some legislation, then you go to another Republican, another Democrat. Then from that point on, it follows the process. Now, that's different than the House of Representatives, where a Democrat majority or a Republican majority can ignore the minority as long as the majority sticks together. Well, now you obviously know Democrats have a better record of that than the Republicans do. But if Republicans stick together, they can ignore the Democrats in the House of Representatives. You get an awkward view of it from the media because they like to always talk about the fighting that's going on in Washington. Right. So when people get together and get something done, you never read about it because it isn't fighting. You got to have credibility. And journalism always emphasizing disagreement hurts the credibility of Congress.
So, Senator, you were born and raised on a farm. You still live on that farm. I was reading about how your mom was one of the first to cast the vote after the 19th Amendment. You were one of two farmers left in the United States Senate. The other is John Tester from Montana, who has a heck of a race on his hands. What is your message right now about agriculture, given farming and agriculture are so critical as a national asset, probably now more than ever. And on top of that, Senator, the things you've been fighting for to get more disclosure on foreign ownership of farms.
About 2% of the people in this country are family farmers that produce the food for the other 98%. In fact, we produce a third more than we consume domestically, so we have to export, and that's why exports are very important for prosperity in agriculture. Right now, there's not much prosperity because input costs are about $100 an acre more than a farmer's going to get out of his crop. But it's important that 2% of the people that are actually family farmers speak up so people know that food grows on farms and not in grocery stores or milk comes out of a cow instead of out of a bottle. I think 98% of the people don't really realize that. So speak up for it. But in the United States Senate, then those of us that are crop farmers have to speak up the same way. And it's just a burden that I welcome. I'm not the only one that knows something about agriculture, but I think I'm one of the few that have dirt under our fingernails. And that's what's so important, to get the word out, because food security is as much as a part of national security. And the reason we have some safety nets for farmers is because the family farm that invests a whole year of labor, a whole year of capital, a whole year of management, and maybe at the end of the year, you don't have anything to show for it.
Right.
You can have hail, you can have natural disasters. Just everything is beyond the control of the individual farmer. That's why we have a farm program. Don't forget the farm program is 85% food stamps. That doesn't go in the pockets of farmers. That goes into the pocket of city people. Right now, we're talking about having a 5-year farm bill.
Right.
It's delayed from 2023. It should have been passed. 2024 should have been passed. So we're going to have another 1-year extension. And that extension should include the Biden-Harris inflation that has affected the increased costs of seed, fertilizer, chemicals, interest rates, diesel, and machinery parts. And so far, the Democrats don't want to do it. Now, it's not a Republican inflation. It's a Democrat inflation that has increased the input costs for farmers.
But the threat from foreign interests buying up American farmland, because you've been talking a lot about that recently, is that something we really need to be concerned about? And what do we do about it?
First of all, we wouldn't have any record of it if then Senator Wallop, now deceased of Wyoming, and I had not got legislation passed in the late 1970s that records who owns farmland in the United States. Now, it's a small percentage, something under 3%, but it's something that you can legitimately keep track of. But recently, we've had Chinese buying farmland in the United States. I don't think they're the biggest purchaser of it, but you hear about it.
Yeah.
So in the defense bill of a year ago, it passed the Senate, but it was taken out in the House of Representatives. We passed a bill saying that Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran could not buy farmland in the United States. I still support that legislation. Then more recently, passed the House of Representatives a bill that would make the Secretary of Agriculture a permanent member of the organization we call CFIUS, an acronym for Commission on Foreign Investment in the United States. And he should be there.
So, Senator, for the 44th time, you completed what they call the full Grassley. You went to all 99 counties in Iowa for the 44th time. What are people telling you out there in terms of their hopes, their dreams, and their concerns today?
Well, in 2/3 of the 99 counties, the Farm Bill came up. Why we aren't passing a 5-year Farm Bill? Beyond that, the irritation that Iowans have, and I think in the entire country, with Biden deciding to do different than Trump was doing, have an open border and having 10 million or so people illegally enter our country, because you can't enter America without our permission. That's what the law says. But the president doesn't enforce the law. Then beyond that, and maybe even more so, is the high cost of living. For a family of 4 in Iowa, that's $7,500 more a year that they're spending, And that's burned into their budget for the rest of their life.
So, Senator, 8,927 times you have the near record of consecutive votes, only interrupted by COVID. Reminds me of Lou Gehrig and Cal Ripken in Major League Baseball. Of all the votes, of the 8,927 votes up to that moment, was there one in particular that stood out that you said, you know what, I really feel good about this one?
Well, 4 votes I cast that wasn't passed, supporting a constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget of the federal government.
Oh.
We weren't successful, but I think that's the most important thing for a strong fiscal policy, sound fiscal policy. Passing the False Claims Act, which brought $73 billion back into the federal treasury. And then, I don't know for how many years I heard, how come you guys in Congress don't live under the same laws we live under? I heard that for 15 years, finally got past the Congressional Accountability Act that apply those laws to us. Then Senator Stevens, now deceased, when I got that passed, he says, I hope you're the first one sued. Well, I've never been sued, and I don't know whether any members of Congress have been sued for violating the Congressional Accountability Act. But we don't have 2 laws in America anymore, one for Capitol Hill and one for the rest of the country.
As it should be. Well, Senator, really appreciate your time today. I appreciate your service. We all do, not just for the people of Iowa, but for this country on so many different fronts. And what you've really shown above everything else is maybe the most important ground we have in America is not necessarily on a farm. It's called common ground, and trying to find those things that unite us and move us forward to keep us strong and prosperous.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.